Everyone. Let's talk for a few minutes about Castiglione's The Courtier and Machiavelli's The Prince. Here you see a title page from The Courtier. In the Middle Ages, in theory at least, Christians believed that one situation when one was born was sort of put in place by God. So kings were born to be kings, knights were born to be knights, peasants were born to be peasants, and there was no real upward mobility. You stayed where you were. In the Renaissance, this started to change this thinking, and individuals began believing that they had the power to shape their destiny, to move up and down in society. This wasn't widespread, but this was beginning. Castiglione's The Courtier was written as sort of a manual for how one should behave in court. So the way careers were often made in Renaissance Europe was through politics and for a career in public service aligned in a court around a public figure like a duke or a prince or a king. So there was proper behavior that had to be followed. And for one to move up in social rank, one had to know what was expected of them at any time. So there were a lot of rules and modes of behavior that could help you in your career, and that's what Castiglione set out to write. It was sort of a self-help book. The way that The Courtier is set up is as sort of an imaginary court setting with a set of conversations. So it's all through dialogue where these courtiers are sort of passing the time by talking to each other. And the section you're reading is they're kind of in a competition to describe what a perfect courtier is. What would be his characteristics, his mannerisms? Now, these courtiers had to cope in a real world, so this was real information. This wasn't just idealized information about how a court should be, but it was how to deal in a court where some very unpleasant characters may be, and how to cope with them. So the book is set up as a dialogue, kind of like a play, and there are different points of view on what makes a good courtier. They also speculate on how not only a prince or somebody could rule their people, but how men and women can best rule themselves. So we learn about what a good woman would be like, along with what a good man would be like. So we'll look at Machiavelli soon, but like him, Castiglione is very interested in creating a self-image. This is like early branding, really. And what he said would be helpful is if you could cultivate different roles that you could play. So being like an actor on a stage, you study your parts and you learn what you need to do. So courtiers, for example, are expected to speak in a particular type of language that you wouldn't talk in at home. It's kind of a very stylized, contrived language. So you would practice your lines, what you would want to say, but you would speak in such a way as if it seems like it just came effortlessly off the top of your head. So there's this natural projection of grace that somebody would give off. Like this was just the way they were born. This wasn't something that they had practiced. Here we have a title page from Machiavelli's The Prince. As we go through here. So again, we had already talked about the medieval idea that God had made some people wealthy and nobles and some people peasants. And what we find that the real life wasn't really like that, of course, that there were people who were, of course, loyal to their leader, their duke, their prince, but there was also a lot of competition between them. They were trying to oust each other, trying to best each other. So there was a fiercely competitive world in Italy at this time. And the prince is based in part on Machiavelli's own diplomatic service with the Medici family. He was sent to exile at some point, but he writes a book dedicated to the Medicis, a book of advice to the non-hereditary ruler. In other words, not to a prince who has come to that title through his death of his father or a family member and he's next in line, but someone who in this fiercely competitive world has taken over the rule of an area. And mostly he's talking about Renaissance Italy. So what do you do if you've taken control, wrested it from somebody else, ousted someone to get your position as a prince, let's just say? How do you maintain control? This is mostly what the prince speaks to. So it says here that, let's see if I'm using the right pen here. The book illustrates the benefits of practicing pragmatic ruthlessness. All right. What that means, pragmatic, that's day to day. What do I do as a real prince? Not an idealized world, but what can I really do to be in control? And a ruthlessness, you're not there to make friends, you're there to rule. All right. So it wasn't that, Machiavelli was immoral or ungodly, but he's just trying to be practical. How do you get people to follow you? And his version of a good leader was pretty objectionable, and his works were condemned, and he was even placed on the church's index of prohibited books. And his name, kind of any means to an end, has become an adjective in English. We call it Machiavellian. So someone who is behaving in this way is considered Machiavellian. So there are a lot of themes in The Prince, but mostly war, how to fortify a city, how to prevent insurrections, how do you keep people from rising up against you, diplomacy. Almost everything was viewed through the lens of warfare. One of the most interesting things he says is that to remain in power, a prince must avoid the hatred of his people. Okay, so he's not saying we want to go out and make everybody hate us. However, being loved is not necessary. In fact, it's better for them to be feared, right? Kind of like you're afraid of your parents, right? That kind of paternal kind of rule where you have a strong hand and you firmly guide your state. So a little bit of fear is a good thing, but hatred, he says, can cause a prince's downfall, because that's when you'll have people rise up against you. So how do you get people to be on your side with a little bit of fear, but not tip over into hatred? So these are the kinds of tips he gives. So we still have an idea that grows out of the Middle Ages of fortune and fate ruling man's actions. But in the Renaissance, we get more and more discussion of free will. What can an individual do against the hand of destiny or religion? And what he's doing partly is to investigate how much of his success or failure is caused by his own free will and how much is determined by nature. So we'll see this come up again as we move forward into the Enlightenment and beyond, this idea of how much free will do we have and how much of our personalities is determined by nature and environment. But Machiavelli is already addressing that again, with his lens of rulership. How does a ruler, how much of what he does is based on his own capacity and how much is shaped by the context in which he lives. And here's some sources in case you're interested in reading farther.